My anxiety magically went away when I did this one thing, which is very important because for many years I struggled with OCD, anxiety, and not being able to do normal things that normal people could do normally. Everything seemed very difficult, and I couldn't get outside of my own head. It was as if anxiety had taken over my life. OCD was ruining everything that I held dear, and life was not enjoyable. And if you can relate, smash the like button, let me know as a comment below, because anxiety is a very, very crippling thing that can stop us dead in our tracks. It really does limit what we're able to do in life, and it makes everything have this sense of impending doom where we feel like the worst thing's always right around the corner and the worst thing's right about to happen. But I learned throughout the years of dealing with anxiety that there were ways to cope. There were things I can do. For example, I got into becoming an alcoholic, and that seemed to help for a little bit until I found out that was actually backfiring. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about anxiety, we're going to talk about OCD, we're going to talk about addiction, we're going to talk about all this stuff and break it down so that you understand what we went through. Now, I do have to disclaimer this. Terry and myself are not doctors. We're not trained physicians or counselors or addiction treatment people. We're just two guys that got sober, and we've dealt with a lot of the same things that a lot of you guys have said you're dealing with. And so we want to bring light to what we learned throughout the process. And that's what today's talk is going to be all about. So Terry, how you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I don't have a whole lot of anxiety today or OCD, although there is always some.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. And now I remember for me, before I started drinking, like I remember I would go through life and I was always kind of nervous. You know, I was kind of jumpy. I wasn't like super jumpy, but it was enough to notice that, okay, you know, it's a little bit more than normal. And then throughout life, as I got into being an adult, I had a therapist who told me that I had anxiety, which made my anxiety go off the charts. Because now that I had a name for it and someone who has credentials and letters after their name telling me that I have anxiety, now I was able to see it everywhere. And that is right around the time that I had started drinking a little more heavily. And then when I got into full-blown alcoholism, I wasn't even able to go get the mail. That's how anxious I was. I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't do anything. And sometimes I would force myself to go to like my kids', graduations and stuff like that. And they were very difficult. I actually contemplated not going, which as a father breaks your heart because you're like, okay, what the hell's the matter with me where I can't go sit where 1,000 other people are sitting? Big deal. Nobody cares. And this is something that really, really troubled my life and made things very difficult. And it also drove me into drinking because I didn't have a solution to the problem. I didn't have something that would work. People told me to do mindfulness and this and that and all kinds of different things. But what I found out was that nothing really worked. And it had to be a mindset shift that I wasn't actually looking for. Right? Like I wanted the anxiety to go away. I wanted to drink less, but I didn't know how to get there. And by searching for the answer, it became harder to find. Did you find this as well, Terry?
Absolutely. Trying to force things in alcoholism it never worked for me. And anxiety is a perfect example. I would try not to be so anxious. I'd try to calm down. I'd use alcohol to try and calm that, and it would just get worse and worse. And the answer was not trying to force it. That was it for me. And that's for most of the things that I go through in my life is trying not to force things, trying to go with the flow, shall I say? But that's what tended to help me a lot.
Yeah.
Was just not people in sobriety. You hear a lot about acceptance. And acceptance was and is a big factor in keeping my anxiety under control. And the way that works is it's not accepting the fact that there's bad things going on in the world, and so I have to agree with it. No, you don't have to agree with it, but just accept the fact that I'm just, as you've said a million times, I'm one of 8 billion people in this world. I only have control over certain things. And accepting that fact, and then moving on, doing what I can do to control a situation, and just letting go of the rest. That is one of the biggest things for controlling my anxiety. There's lots of other things, but the biggest thing for me was taking alcohol off the table. And listening to you or discussing with you our difference in how anxiety has affected our lives. It's interesting because for me, I did not have a lot of anxiety before alcohol became a real problem. My anxiety was mostly alcohol induced, and all the problems that come with uncontrolled alcohol intake. Hiding the drinking, lying all the time, the negative consequences that happen. Legal, marital relationship, that sort of thing. And that's when the anxiety kind of went off the roof. And I know that was the case with you as well. But I think for you, the anxiety was a little bit more related to your upbringing, and just a more of a difficult time when you were in your upbringing. Yeah, am I right? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of us, when you deal with trauma and issues in your upbringing, what happens is it trains your brain to be a certain way. So for me, it's interesting because you'll notice if you've ever dealt with trauma or issues with someone who was abusive towards you or whatever it is, you're going to notice that you could be sitting at lunch someday and you'll see someone across the way and your brain will calculate what that person looks like, and they can look like the person who abused you, and all of a sudden you'll get feelings of anxiety and you're not going to know why. And your brain knows. It's like, oh, the mustache and the thing and the eyes and the glasses or whatever fits this person. And it says, oh, that's danger, right? And what we have to realize is that our brains, no matter what, are pattern recognizing machines. What your brain is trying to do is it's trying to get you out of trouble. It's trying to say, hey, look, we know that from years of experience, this is what happened and this was bad. For me, I had a hard time getting used to people with loud voices. I grew up in a family where my Thanksgiving was louder than your Thanksgiving, right? People were yelling, cops were called. It was loud. And everyone in my family is a very loud talker, including myself. And we look at that, and in my life, when there's a state of calm and I hear loud talking, specific ways of loud talking, it sends me into anxiety mode. Even today, right? Even today, I still have that. Now, what was it that took me from the anxiety in the beginning, the anxiety drinking, and to now where surprisingly it's almost as if there is no anxiety? It's weird. It's like, okay, where is it? I mean, I'm kind of like waiting. Hey, where are you at, buddy? Where are you hiding, But it's kind of gone. And what we have to look at is the understanding. There's three things. We're going to look at understanding. We're going to look at the way your mind works. And then we're going to look at vices, things that you do to help your anxiety. So first of all, we have to look at what is it, how does it work, okay? Understanding. Anxiety works, as we said, where your mind is working a certain way. Okay, now we tend to say, well, I'm weak because I can't be around big people or people with loud voices or people that look a certain way or talk a certain way or act a certain way or sound a certain way. So we say to ourselves, these are things. Now for me, one of them, which was obvious, right? You have some that are obvious and some that are not. The obvious one was I grew up going to churches. I had church abuse, and I'm anxious in churches. Even to this day, my anxiety levels have dropped 99%. I'd still have a little bit going to a church, partly because the trauma in the past, and partly because I feel like everyone knows that I don't agree with them and they're going to start yelling at me. So there's two things going on there. Now, once we understand, okay, this is how our brain copes with things. This is what's going on. Okay, then we get into the second part, which is understanding the way that your mind works versus the content. This will keep you in a rut. The rut is when something is introduced. I'm sitting at lunch and I see someone who reminds me of my abuser, but I don't think about it in thoughts. There's no words in my head saying that guy looks like whoever. It doesn't happen. It's just boom, sight, feeling, anxious. I say, what the hell is going on? I'm sitting here at lunch with my friend who I've had lunch with 5,000 times, and all of a sudden I feel this urge that I want to go run and hide. Why? The first thing we do is we say, well, what's wrong with me? That's a worse thing to do, because the fact of the matter is nothing's wrong with you. Everything's working perfectly fine. When you're driving down the road and your car says check engine, change your oil, get your brakes fixed, you don't get mad at it and say, oh, damn light telling me the brakes are working fine, but the light, no. The light is telling you something, which means it's working fine, it's doing its job. So you take it in and they say, yeah, the brakes need to be fixed. Now, in your mind, these are the lights that are going off saying there is danger here. If we take it and say, what is wrong with me? Now we're assigning it to us rather than the way that our mind works. And the way that our mind works is to protect us and to give us stuff that's going to keep us safe. Now, the way that ours is wired, if you have anxiety like me, it's going to go in a cycle, and it's going to take any unknown stimulus, and it's going to put it in that cycle of anxiety thinking. You can't help it. It's just going to do it. Now, what most people do is they say, what's wrong with me first, and then they try to fight it. Oh, how do I get rid of this anxiety? Why isn't it going away? Maybe if I sit this way, maybe if I do that, maybe if I talk myself out of it. Bad. You can't talk yourself out of the way your mind works. You can't do it. Because what is that? That is content. You have the way your mind's working over here, and you have the content being introduced. So it'd be like me sitting at lunch and saying, well, maybe if I pretended that guy didn't have a beard or a mustache, I wouldn't get anxious. No. The way your mind works is it sees danger and it gets anxious because you need to do something. But the secret is when you start to understand and accept. This is the way my mind works. It's doing its job. And there is no threat here. That person across the way, he's just eating his lunch just like me. He looks like the person who was a jerk when I was growing up, but they're not. So I'm okay. And if something ends up being not okay, no amount of anxiety is going to help me. So you accept, acknowledge, and let it be. But the minute you try to fight it, you're now throwing it into the content of mind rather than the working of mind. And if you throw more content at something that's working, it's like putting more gas on an engine you don't want to go anymore. If you don't want it to go, you stop putting gas in it. But, we're wired to think about this a different way, and I think that's detrimental. Now, how does that fit with your type of anxiety that you've dealt with, Terry?
Well, as I was saying, my anxiety was mostly alcohol driven. And I'll give an example of the police, okay? Now, when I was drinking, for a long, long time, I would drink. I'd drive. Don't ever do that. Don't ever do that. So many bad things happen when people drink and drive. But I did that, and I got in trouble for it. And, my anxiety would come up when I'd be driving. And alcohol would, well, actually, after I got caught, I stopped drinking and driving. I just kept drinking, and I just didn't drive anymore. But after I got sober, a police car pulls in behind me, the anxiety would build. Why? Why would the anxiety build? I have nothing to worry about if a police car is behind me, other than he can put my license in his computer, and then see, this is the way my mind would go. Oh, he's going to put my license in the computer. He's going to see that I got in trouble, and then he's going to pull me over, and then things are going to go bad. But I'm sober. I have nothing to worry about, but the anxiety would keep going more and more and more, and then I'm looking at the speedometer. Am I going the right speed? I got to make sure I change lanes right. I got to do this. I got to make sure, and I just have all this anxiety because this guy's behind me. He's not following me. He's just behind me. And then the way I deal with it or dealt with it is, okay, it's just another car. It's not a big deal. Even if I was to get pulled over, I'm legal. I have my insurance. My license is okay. I'm driving legally. And what's the worst that's going to happen? Oh, I might get a ticket for something that I made a mistake on. Okay, that's fine, I guess. Not so fine, but it's fine. And that's kind of how I deal with the anxiety in a situation like that. And that seems to work for me. Anxiety still happens. There's really silly little anxieties that I get, like since I moved, I live really close to a huge park. It's like 50,000 acres. There's hundreds of miles of trails, and when I walk my dog there every day, I pick a new trail and I go almost get lost, and that doesn't cause anxiety. I'm okay with that part of it. But what does get there's a little bit of anxiety with there's bear, there's mountain lions, there's moose, and I actually talked to somebody that a moose killed their dog on last Thanksgiving. So I'm walking my dog. I'm like, oh my God. So I do get a little bit of anxiety with that. But then at the same time, how often am I going to see these animals? How often are they going to attack if I do see them? You know, there's that unknown. All of my anxiety comes from fear of the unknown, fear of what I don't know that's going to happen. My mind has a tendency to take it to the extreme, but how often does that extreme happen? For me, I don't know that it ever has happened, you know, and I have to look back at my history, and the worst things didn't happen, usually, other than my going to the hospital because of alcohol, but the worst thing didn't happen. I didn't die. I'm still here. So that's kind of how I deal with the anxiety nowadays. It's still there. There's still money anxiety, of course, worrying about the family, worrying about my wife. She drives to work every day on a windy road. You know, I'm worried that she's going to hit a deer or something, you know, and there is that anxiety. But all I can do is just support and, you know, be the best person I can, be there, have my phone available for her, and do what I can do.
Yeah, and I think it's important to distinction the difference between content anxiety and non-content anxiety, because you have two things, and what I'm hearing with Terry is a lot of your stuff is content anxiety. There might be a bear, it's a scary drive, you know, I need to pay the bills, whatever it is. That's more or less content anxiety, which the best way I have found to deal with content anxiety is by going through things. Like, okay, I'm a parent and my kids are like 20 now. And when your kids first start driving, it's terrifying. You're like, no, I should be driving. I should be taking care of you. You shouldn't be allowed to go anywhere. Sit in the seat and that's it. But what happens is the first time they go out driving on their own, you're a nervous wreck. And then over time, it starts to get less and less and less because your brain has been programmed, we're going to be okay. Like when you're 20 and you have money anxiety, it's usually less than when you're, 40 or 50, because now you're like, oh, well, I've had jobs, I've figured things out. It's going to be okay. Okay? So we look at that and we're like, okay, anxiety about a topic is a different type of thing. But a lot of people, they do drink about that. It's like probably the number one reason people drink, because they're anxious about things and they can't shut their mind off and they don't know how to cope. Right? A lot of people say alcoholics are bad at coping. Well, newsflash, human beings are bad at coping, right? And we have to look at that and say, okay, so what we don't want to happen is we don't want our content anxiety to be fueled by alcohol and turn into working of the mind anxiety. We don't want it to turn into the way our life works. And I'm sure Terry probably found this out when he was drinking, where he's like, well, now my anxiety is all the time. And there's nothing I can do. Like, win the lotto, I'm anxious about, what am I going to do with all this money now? What, I get pulled over and the cop lets you go. Oh, he must have let me go because they're going to follow me home and arrest me there. You start to think about these things, but when it goes into all-time lifestyle anxiety, I think a lot of it has to do with the way your brain works. And also, there's another type of anxiety, which if you haven't seen my videos on anxiety, check out, they're like 3 years old. what we looked at was anxiety as an identity crisis. Because some people have anxiety where they don't know who they are. And this is something common with alcoholics. They're like, I don't feel comfortable in my own skin. I don't know who I am. I don't know where I fit in the world. And my answer to that might not be a good answer for a lot of people. But the answer for that is, who cares? We spend our entire life trying to be these people, but are these people really who we are? Am I the businessman, the talk sober guy, the funny whatever? Am I these things, or am I something more? And I think when we look at it, we're looking at everything to shield our ego from being seen, to shield ourselves from, hey, this is who I am, just like everyone else. Maybe I'm not as special as I was told when I was 5, right? Maybe there's something more, and maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe me worrying about who I am is taking all the energy from the world of who other people are. Maybe it doesn't matter as much as I think. And when we start to look at that, the beauty of it is that now you can create a new person. You can create a new version of yourself. You can decide what you want to think and how you want to feel. And I think that's very important. And I think it's the gift that being sober gives us. Because when we're drinking, all we want to do is protect that ego and hide it from everyone. If people saw the real me who drinks and like a maniac all day, every day, then they wouldn't like me. And we're hardwired for people to like us. I guess probably what the anxiety is about with the police officer, that and authority, right? We want him to like us. We don't want him to pull us over and say, hey, you suck at driving, pay me $500, you know? And when we stop and we slow down and we start to realize that we are not the most important people on planet Earth. There's 8 billion people on planet Earth. Do you think anybody cares that I'm sitting in this seat and right now I'm anxious? No? Then why should I? The world's going to spin with or without us. Whether I'm drinking, whether I'm not drinking, it doesn't matter. And that can be sad. Oh, wow, I don't matter more than all 8 billion people. Or it could be freeing. Oh, wow, I'm free to live and be and do who I want and be who I want. And I could be free. And when we realize that we can be free, it opens up this new way of living that is kind of hard to describe. It's like things don't bother you as much as they used to because you're not identifying with them. You're not attached to them. And Buddha says that the root of suffering, the root of anxiety, the root of all this is desire. I am desiring people to think that I am something other than what I am. But what if I just started and I said, you know what? And this is why the blessing of being an alcoholic is the first step is admitting you're an alcoholic. And we admit, I was beat by a bottle. Damn thing kicked my ass, and it kicked it good. And I couldn't unkick it. I needed help. And I started to realize that, wow, if that little thing can be this big defining factor in my life, then does all that other stuff really matter? Like, what if I am just a normal person who's susceptible to alcoholism or health issues or whatever? What if life is just happening and I'm part of it? What if it's not all about me? What do you think about that, Terry?
Yeah, it's definitely not about me. When I was drinking, I was trying to put on a persona of this successful person that had it all together. And I was trying to be somebody who I wasn't, because I did not have it all together, that's for sure. And, that's anxiety just got worse and worse because I was having a more and more difficult time trying to maintain this house of cards that I was building to try and make myself look good. And after I quit drinking, I was able to let go of all that. Let go of trying to impress other people, trying to make myself look this certain way. I just tried to do the right thing every day. It's sounds really silly, just trying to do the best next thing. I hear that all the time, but that's what I tried to do, and keeping life super simple, and just moving in the right direction and being a good person. Those are the kinds of things that have lowered my anxiety. Just, I don't have to hide anymore. I don't have to put on this persona anymore. I am who I am. And if somebody doesn't like that, I'm sorry. There's going to be people that don't like me. It's hard to say, but it's going to happen. And there's going to be people that I don't necessarily like. And I just have to move on from there. Just being a good person is really what it's all about for me. And I think anybody that knows me outside of these YouTube rooms, I think they also think I'm a pretty good person. There's definitely some people in my life that don't think that because of some of the mistakes I've made. And I've tried to rectify them. And some people haven't accepted that. And I have to make that okay.
Well,
Is it okay?
I think it's interesting too, because when we talk about people not liking us and us not liking people, that's a myth. Yeah. That's not actually true. What's happening is they're not liking their ideas and their perceptions of who you are. Right? Because we make all of these assumptions before we meet someone, before we know someone, based on whatever. Like that guy, when I'm having lunch and I see the person and I get anxiety, I'm not going to like that guy. And it's purely on the fact that he's got a beard and a mustache or whatever it is. And it's nothing else. And even if it is something else, like, okay, maybe this guy is a jerk. Maybe he really is. It's not me not liking him because I don't know him. What I know is his persona of being a jerk, which is protecting his ego from being seen. And when we start to look at this and we start to realize that everything is based on what we perceive it as. Now, this isn't to say, hey, go give every jerk and mean person a hug. It's probably not productive. But it is to say, maybe I don't know. And if maybe I don't know with other people, maybe I also don't know with myself. Because I remember for years, people would say, you're an alcoholic. And I'd say, no, I'm not. I am not an alcoholic. I just drink as much as alcoholics do, as often as alcoholics do, and get the same outcome as alcoholics. But I'm not an alcoholic, not me. Well, if the boot fits, maybe I'm an alcoholic. And maybe it doesn't matter as much as I think because it's chemical dependency that drives it. See, we got this stuff all cattywampus, as they say in Bama, right? We got it all cattywampus, and it's backwards. Because we're looking at it and saying, well, this is who I am. This is who he is. I shouldn't feel this way. They shouldn't be this way. When in actuality, if I grew up in Terry's house when I was a kid, just like Terry, and I had Terry's mindset, and everything that happened to Terry happened to me, I would be Terry today. There's no way of looking at it a different way. You are programmed to be who you are by what you've gone through and where you are now. It is a fact. You say, oh, well, I wouldn't be an alcoholic. Really? Go drink as much as I did and you'll be an alcoholic. That's what happens, chemical dependency. I'm not going to be mean. Really? Have enough people do wrong things to you and you'll probably be mean because you have to protect yourself. Yep. Or maybe you're the opposite. You're like me and you're overly not mean. And that's your way of protecting yourself. Well, if I give everyone everything, then, they're not going to hurt me or whatever it is. And we start to look at our life as we are here because we were brought here by circumstances that we may or may not have been able to control. And now we're here, and maybe there's things I can't control. It took me 7 years of sobriety to get to a point accidentally where my anxiety just went away. And I actually think that the last bit of anxiety went away 6 months after I quit smoking. So it was giving up a vice and also accepting the inevitable death of my father. Right? I looked at that and I was like, well, wait a minute. Here I am worried about all this stuff and all these anxiety things, and what's going to happen to my dad's going to happen to everyone. Like, that's something we can't get away from. It is part of life, and we could look at it as a bad thing, or we could look at it as the cycle of life. Like Terry says, he's walking his dog, and he's afraid of the moose. And I'll tell you, I grew up, we used to go to Wyoming, and I was probably 30 feet from a moose. They're big, and they are scary. And they're also one of the most magnificent, beautiful things to see in real life. I mean, you're like, oh my God, this thing's majestic, And we can look at it rationally. Does that mean we should go camping where it says, hey, Goldilocks and the 3 mean bears live here? Yeah, let's pitch a tent there. No. It means we can look at it, and we can look at both sides. We can admire the moose from afar, and we can admire life, and we can look at life as this is where we are because this is where we were brought. And up until now, I didn't really have a choice. But now that I realize it, now I do have a choice, and now I am free. If I don't go back into it, and if I don't go drinking again. Because when I drink, it makes me believe the lie that all this stuff is me. I am anxious. No. Your body has a feeling of anxiety that was provoked by years and years of training. It's a chemical response. You are not anxious. Anxiety is not, they're not, oh, he's funny, he's nice, he's rich, he's anxious. Not really. Those aren't really us. I mean, I can be funny, I can be anxious, but that's not what defines me. And I think that's important to note.
Yes, indeed. I remember there was one guy in the AA rooms, and he was a guy that I didn't like. He was like, every time he'd share, he'd start off with, there was 6 people with more sobriety in these rooms than me. I have 35 years, da-da-da-da-da, and you have to do this, you have to do... It was like, oh, come on, every single time you say the same thing, man. And then he was and they used to call me thermonuclear. And it's like, okay, yeah, you were a really mean guy, you were the meanest guy around, da-da-da. And so I didn't really like him that much. But actually Ben said something that's kind of close to this. He said it earlier. He said, one thing that helped me a lot and still helps is to wish the best for those who wronged me or are jerks, because they probably need our best wishes. And, more than that, for me, it was a matter of talking to this guy, not listening to what he has to say. I just developed this picture of who he was outside of when he's talking. And I talked to him, person to person, man to man. The guy's the nicest guy in the world. It's just, that's just what he says in those rooms. But he was the nicest guy in the world, and getting to know him. And that's what many of the people that I think are jerks or whatever is I try to put myself into their shoes. Somebody's driving terribly. Well, maybe there's a reason that they're driving really aggressively and making me mad. They're not trying to make me mad. They're not doing it on purpose. And I'm sure I've driven like that many times. It made other people frustrated with the way I drive, especially when I'm pulling a trailer behind me. But it's putting myself in their shoes, and that's what's helped me a lot in dealing with other people. I don't have people that frustrate me. I mean, sure, people frustrate me, and like get road rage at the grocery store because people are walking too slow. Well, they're not in a hurry like I am. I'm always in a hurry, so I just accept it. Go around them. It's okay, and I don't have to be in a hurry. There's no reason to be in a hurry. It's okay. Things will get done.
Ashes of Eden has an interesting one. He says, I'm very religious, and I still wonder why God has set me down this path of addiction. Is it my fault? Is it my weakness? Why has God forsaken me? Well, I think I had a hard time with that. I remember I used to be a preacher. I used to stand on a soapbox in Santa Monica, California, and tell people they were going to hell, which isn't a good thing. I mean, they want to beat you up when you say stuff like that. And the first night I preached, I did get shoved into a tree. And I remember when I left that and became an alcoholic years later, I would throw my Bible and I'd wonder why God had made me here. And I realized that God or the universe or however things happened, it wasn't personal to me. Like, I don't care who you are. If you drink enough, you're going to be an alcoholic. That's how chemicals work. And I had a hard time when my dad was passing. It was difficult to watch because he's very religious. And he would struggle with, God, why did you give me this cancer? And, you know, it wasn't from cigar smoking, but cigar smoking didn't help. And it was easy to say, oh, well, because it was because I smoked, or it was because of this, or because of that. Well, my grandma passed at 80-something, and she had lung cancer. She never smoked in her life. So what we have to look at is we're on this rock spinning through the galaxy very fast with 8 billion other people. So we're in like this car called the world with 8 billion other people in the car, and none of us are wearing seatbelts. And we think that God is only paying attention to us. And that's not exactly true. When you look at it, we have to understand that, one, we don't know. We don't know. You have no idea. You can speculate. I believe God's this way. This book says this. This book says this. We could speculate at best. And when we start to realize that our ideas we cling to are subject to flaw. Like when I was drinking, I had everything figured out. I knew the Bible, I knew business, I knew all these things about life, but I didn't know shit because I was an alcoholic and a drunk that couldn't fix my own life. But I thought I was up on this high horse and God was paying attention to me, and this is how everything should be in this box. And there's something that I learned, and it took me sobriety to learn. And it was the minute I think I have God figured out is the minute I had become him. Interesting. What that means is that if you think you have God figured out, then you are now God. Because now you're in a position to say, well, this is what God wants. This is what God doesn't want. God gave me addiction, but God took Terry out of addiction. Or we're all just here, and all this stuff just happens. And now we have a choice to look at it and say, well, okay, I'm an alcoholic. Did God forsake me? Is it weakness? Is it my fault? Well, who cares? And I say that with all understanding and knowing where you're at. And the who cares is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter why you're where you're at. What matters is what are you going to do to not be there anymore? Because we get so hung up on, if this would happen, then I would get sober. If God would rescue me, then I would be sober. And we're waiting for this external thing. And it reminds me of the story where there's this guy who falls out of his boat in the middle of the ocean during a storm. What was he doing boating out there? But at any rate, he's out there. And he falls out of his boat, and his boat sinks because it's a crappy boat. And another boat comes up. Here we are. Hey, buddy, get in. We're going to save you. No. I prayed. God's going to save me. Boat goes away because they're like, dude doesn't want to be saved. Guess he wants to, ride around on the waves. Helicopter comes by. Hey, get in the helicopter. We're going to save you. No. I prayed. God's going to save me. Right? And all these things come up. And finally, the guy drowns. And he gets to heaven, and God's like, hey, why didn't you let me save you? And he's like, well, I was waiting for you. He said, I sent a boat. I sent a helicopter. I sent everything. You wouldn't get in. I was just sitting there waiting. And I think we need to realize that the help is right there, and it's in the form of education. It's in the form of understanding, is this my fault? I don't know. Was drinking my fault? Well, I did pick up a drink when I was 13. Is it my fault that I was an alcoholic? I don't know. And I also don't care. What I care about is being sober. That's what I care about. And we start to understand that, and we start to let go of everything and say, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if God forsake me. I don't even know if he forsakes people. That's a human word. We made that up. I don't know what that means. And we start to look at it as, well, I'm just as important as 8 billion other people to the universe or God or whatever it is. Why should I say that me here should get help with my addiction when someone else should not? I don't know. Maybe God has helped all of us by allowing us to see this is chemical. Get rid of the chemical, you're not going to be an addict. You can't be addicted to a chemical that is not being introduced to your body anymore. You can't be. That's how chemical dependency works. It goes away when you stop drinking. It might take a while. You might still get cravings, but the chemical dependency part will go away when you stop. So focus on that, not all the backstory. Because what I found is the backstory doesn't really matter. Sobriety matters. And I hope that helps, and I hope I didn't step on any toes. But I want you to understand that I've been there with the religious side of things, and I don't not like religion. I don't like it's neither here nor there to me. But I did see the damage that religious thinking did in my life. And maybe that's just my way of taking it. Maybe. But I think a lot of people have told me they resonate with it as well. What do you think about that, Terry?
Well, I could look at it two different ways. One is completely agreeing with exactly what you said. Well, the other is also agreeing with what you said. But, okay, so if I look at my past and my drinking and all that, and I have those same questions. Why has God set me down this path of addiction? Is it my fault? Am I weak? Why has God forsaken me? Well, I was very self-centered. And I was self-centered in the way that I wanted to drink. I wanted to keep drinking. I didn't want anybody to know I was drinking. It was a very self-centered life when I was in the height, going through my addiction. So maybe God allowed me to become addicted so I could become less self-centered. Because I've learned tools to stay sober, and one is helping other people and also being a good person. So in sobriety, that's what I try to do every day, is I try to help other people. My addiction is not a negative thing in my life. It's something that I can use because I have personal experience. I know what you guys are going through. I may not have dealt with some of the situations that you're dealing with, but I know the feelings. When I hear people's stories, I relate to those feelings. And I know exactly how you feel. I know the struggles to get sober. I've gotten sober and then became unsober, and I can relate, and I know how I got through it, and so I can help other people get through it. So whether the answer to that for me is maybe it was because God wanted me to help other people and become less self-centered, and there's a purpose in my life, or I'm one of just the 8 billion people, like Marcus said, and it's just how life goes. So whether you're religious or not, I can still use my addiction as an asset, not a liability. And that's what's huge for me. And that's what I continue to try to do. And using it as an asset, I'm able to stay sober on a daily basis, as long as I continue to work with other people. Because on top of when I'm working with other people and telling them what I've gone through and how I've succeeded in sobriety, I can see signs that maybe they have that's not working so well for them, and I can see that myself, and that can help me stay sober and help me keep an eye out for maybe some of the behaviors that I might be falling back into that I'm not realizing. And so that's kind of the way I look at that. And I look at those questions. I don't worry about those questions about the whys anymore. The whys are not important to me anymore, other than the fact that it's a good idea for me to kind of keep in mind, why did I relapse? It's more how did I relapse rather than why did I relapse. But just keep those things in mind. But as far as the big picture of those whys, I don't worry about that anymore. I worry about what am I going to do to stay sober today. And that's what I try to do.
Absolutely. And I think what we'll close with, unless there's any major questions you see there, Terry, I haven't been following them as much because I've been talking too much. But, to each his own. I think one of the things that we have to look at is we have to look at things in terms of helpful data. Is this data helpful? Okay, so Terry could look at it and say, well, why did I relapse? Why didn't I relapse? That's helpful data for me. Why did God forsake me? That's not helpful data. Like, I'm never going to figure that out. Maybe when you get to heaven or whatever, you could ask, but I don't think we're ever going to figure that out. And even if we did, I don't think the answer is something that you would understand, or I would understand, anyone would understand, because it's not the answer we're necessarily looking for. And he follows up saying, I don't feel that way. God is not one thing in the universe that can be measured or verified. God is the independent, transcendent, uncaused cause of all inside. I don't know what God wants from me. Well, maybe God doesn't want anything from you. Maybe God didn't make us to give him stuff. Maybe God just wants us to be. Maybe we're just supposed to accept and live and be sober. I think that's good. I don't think, whatever like if I created something, I wouldn't want it to go around in circles and be miserable. I'd want it to be free and go and live. And I think it's important to look at, we don't know. And this is the beauty that I got in sobriety. The beauty of life of I don't know. Because I used to be able to have people come to me all the time, how do I know what God wants for me? Well, let's look on page 97 of the Bible and figure that I was talking out of places I shouldn't have been talking out of because I didn't really know. I could speculate. I could have ideas. But at the end of the day, I didn't know. And we have to, in my opinion, get away from this self-centered way of living and start to realize, like, personally, I believe that we are all cumulatively whatever the whole universe is. We're all part of it. And so when we look at that, we're like, well, I'm part, you're part, he's part. I don't think there's any forsaking or any gifting or whatever. And the best Bible verse for this is the one in, I think it's Proverbs, that says, it rains on the just and the unjust alike. What does that mean? That means when the cloud rains, I got a farm, Terry's got a farm. Terry's farm gets obliterated, mine does not. Terry looks at me and says, well, Marcus is kind of an ass. Why did God spare his farm? And answering that question is about the same as saying, well, if Marcus is an ass, maybe that's because he needs to eat grass because that's what donkeys do. That makes about as much sense as anything else we can conjure up because we don't know. All we know that it rains on the just and the unjust alike. And we start to understand, hey, maybe God wants us all to do good. Maybe it just is what it is. Maybe we're all just here. Maybe I can go and help someone else. Maybe I can understand life in a different way. And maybe, just maybe, all my thoughts and my ideas and the things I get in fights over at Thanksgiving don't really matter because I don't know what I'm talking about. And to caveat this and end this talk, I would like to say that I don't know. Like, if something happened to me and I got sick, I would probably be a big baby and I would probably cry out and say, why me, why me, why me? I'd like to think I'd be stronger than that, but I probably am not. And when we accept our humanity, and when we accept that we're the same, like you watch little ants going around and doing their thing, down on their level, they got everything figured out. They know how to make the hill. They know how to do this. They know that the magical shoe comes and steps on certain ants that are bad, that don't follow the rules that they all... Do they really know that? I mean, up here, I know that's my shoe. And I accidentally walked on an anthill. And they're going, hey, well, the rain dance guy said that we didn't dance enough, and that's why the shoe came. Or maybe it's just a guy walking, and that's what happened. So we got to look at that. But I think the key is in understanding our humanity and understanding we're fallible and understanding that we're susceptible to addiction and narcissism and depression and all these things. And we're also probably going to be okay if we stop drinking. So, all right. Terry, any last minute thoughts?
Well, thank you so much for bringing that up, Ashes. We really haven't touched too much on that subject, so that's great. And Victor, yes, it is extremely hard to stay sober, but you can do it. Just stay sober 1 minute at a time. If you feel the need to drink, wait 15 minutes. And if you still feel the need, wait another 15 minutes. Keep going. If you haven't joined our Facebook group, join it. You can reach out there. We can talk to you there. I look at it. And there's lots of good people on there. And yeah, it's good to see you all today.
And check out
all the regulars are here.
Yep, and check out talksober.com if you want to support what we're doing. Click the yellow button, sign up. There's all kinds of cool stuff to help you get and stay sober. Thanks for being here.